Australia's Northern Territory holds secrets that no textbook has fully explained. Rock art older than the pyramids. Stone arrangements that align with celestial events nobody living today can account for. Structures carved into sandstone walls with a precision that makes archaeologists go quiet when they stand in front of them. Most Australians have never heard of these places. The ones who have tend to speak about them carefully because the honest answer to most of the questions these sites raise is that nobody actually knows. Not the researchers, not the traditional custodians who have guarded these places across uncounted generations, not the geologists who have dated the rock and come back with numbers that do not fit comfortably inside any existing framework. The Northern Territory covers 1.3 million square kilometres. It contains some of the most ancient exposed rock surface on the planet. And embedded within that ancient landscape are 11 structures, arrangements, and engravings that have resisted every serious attempt at a complete explanation. This is not a video about aliens. This is not a video designed to sell you a theory. This is an honest examination of 11 places in the Northern Territory where the physical evidence is clear, the dates are real, and the explanations remain genuinely incomplete. What makes these sites different from the kind of mystery content that fills recommendation feeds is the source material. The researchers who have worked at these locations are publishing in peer-reviewed journals, presenting at international archaeology conferences, and in several cases, revising their own previous conclusions after encountering evidence they could not fit into the models they arrived with. That process of revision is not a weakness. It is the only honest response to evidence that keeps exceeding expectation. If that kind of question pulls at something in you, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We cover the parts of Australia that the standard history leaves out. Let us get into the first one. Number 1. The Murujuga Rock Art Complex, Burrup Peninsula. The Burrup Peninsula in the Pilbara region of Western Australia sits close enough to the Northern Territory border to shape the cultural conversation of the entire Northwest. But the rock art tradition it belongs to extends directly into the territory's western margins and is considered part of the same continuous artistic and ceremonial landscape that Indigenous custodians have maintained for longer than any other documented artistic tradition on Earth. The engravings on the Burrup, which number in the millions across the peninsula's red granite outcrops, include images of the Tasmanian tiger and the megafauna that disappeared from this continent between 40 and 50,000 years ago. Researchers from the University of Melbourne and international institutions have used uranium series dating and other methods to establish that some of these images predate any comparable rock art site found anywhere in the world. What cannot be explained is the astronomical precision evident in many panel arrangements. Multiple researchers examining the Burrup and its Northern Territory counterpart sites have documented alignments between engraved figures and the positions of specific stars and constellations at specific periods of the year. The alignments are not approximate. They are exact in the way that Stonehenge is exact, but predating Stonehenge by tens of thousands of years. The question nobody has adequately answered is how a culture operating without metal tools, without written mathematics, and without telescopes produced astronomical alignments of this precision across stone panels covering hundreds of square kilometers of broken granite country. Number 2. The Nawarla Gabarnmang rock shelter, Arnhem Land. Deep in the stone country of Western Arnhem Land, accessible only by helicopter or a multi-day foot journey through terrain that does not forgive mistakes, the Nawarla Gabarnmang rock shelter sits in silence that feels earned by its remoteness. The shelter itself is a natural rock formation, but what humans have done inside it over an extraordinary period of time transforms the space into something closer to an engineered structure. Columns of stone have been deliberately removed. The ceiling, which spans an area large enough to shelter a significant gathering, has been modified to create a specific interior space. Charcoal from the floor layers has been radiocarbon dated. The oldest dates returned are 28,000 years before the present. That number places sustained human modification of this site at a period when Europe was at the height of the last ice age and the Neanderthals had only recently disappeared. The people working this rock shelter were shaping interior space with deliberate structural intent more than 2.5 millennia before the oldest confirmed structures anywhere in the Near East. The rock art inside Nawarla Gabarnmang adds a further layer of complexity. Layers of paint have been applied over thousands of years, with different styles, different subject matter, and different pigment compositions sitting atop one another in a sequence that researchers are still working to decode. Some of the images in the deepest layers depict animals and scenes that researchers cannot identify against any known fauna of the relevant period. The structural modifications to the shelter are worth dwelling on. Removing sandstone columns from a load-bearing ceiling is not a casual undertaking. It requires understanding how the rock above will redistribute its weight once a column is gone. Getting that calculation wrong means the ceiling comes down on everyone underneath it. The people who modified Nawarla Gabarnmang did not get it wrong. The ceiling is still standing 28,000 years later. What they understood about structural engineering and how they came to understand it is not explained anywhere in the existing literature. Number 3. The Quinkan rock art sites, Cape York adjacent tradition. The rock art tradition, centred on the sandstone escarpments near Laura in Queensland, extends its cultural and artistic logic directly into the Northern Territory through connected ceremonial networks that predate the arbitrary lines of state borders by an incomprehensible margin. The Quinkan figures, named for the spirit beings they depict, appear in galleries carved and painted into sheltered overhangs throughout this region. The figures are among the most formally sophisticated rock art images found anywhere in the world. They display consistent anatomical conventions, stylistic rules, and compositional principles that suggest a developed artistic tradition with internal logic rather than spontaneous mark-making. What researchers cannot explain is the sudden appearance in some galleries of figures that depart entirely from the established style. Images that show unfamiliar garments, unfamiliar tools, and body proportions inconsistent with the surrounding panels. These anomalous figures have been dated using the same uranium series methods applied to the surrounding conventional imagery, and they are not recent additions. The honest position among researchers who have examined these figures in detail is that they do not know what the anomalous images represent. The suggestion that they might depict contact with a culture or presence unknown to current historical records is discussed in academic literature with the careful language academics use when they are not sure what they are saying. Number 4. The Fish River Sandstone Engravings. The sandstone country of the top end south of Darwin contains engraving sites that receive a fraction of the research attention directed at Arnhem Land's painted galleries, partly because the engravings are harder to date and partly because the area has been less systematically surveyed than the more accessible northern zones. What surveys have been conducted along the Fish River sandstone formations have documented a series of geometric engravings that sit in a different category from the figurative art common to the region. Circles, spirals, parallel lines, and arrangements of dots cut into horizontal sandstone surfaces with a regularity that does not suggest random mark-making. Similar geometric engraving traditions exist on every inhabited continent. The resemblance between specific motif sequences found at the Fish River sites and sequences documented at sites in southern Africa, northern Europe, and Central Asia has been noted by researchers in comparative rock art studies. The distances between these sites are large enough to make direct cultural contact implausible under any conventional model of human prehistory. One explanation is that the geometric forms reflect universal features of human neurological experience, shapes, and patterns that the human brain generates under specific altered states that were probably induced deliberately in ceremonial contexts. This is genuinely the leading academic explanation. It solves the distribution problem elegantly. What it does not explain is the precision and consistency of the arrangements, which go beyond what random neurological experience would be expected to produce. Number 5. The Jawoyn Sacred Bula Sites, Katherine Region. In the Stone Country, east and south of Katherine, the Jawoyn people maintain custodianship over a series of sacred sites associated with the Bula creation narrative. The Bula sites are not open to general visitation, and the details of their full cultural significance are not publicly shared, which is appropriate and correct. What is documented in publicly available archaeological and anthropological literature is the physical nature of certain Bula-associated locations. Rock formations that have been modified or that exist in configurations, researchers have struggled to attribute solely to natural geological processes. Arrangements of stone around specific landscape features that are consistent across multiple sites separated by significant distances. The Jawoyn traditional owners describe these places as locations where the creative forces of the Bula narrative physically entered and shaped the landscape. Western geological analysis of the same sites produces descriptions of the rock formations that are accurate, but that fail to account for certain specific features of their arrangement. The gap between the traditional explanation and the geological explanation is not necessarily a contradiction. It may be a difference in framework rather than a difference in facts. But the physical features of the Bula sites that resist comfortable geological explanation have been documented, and they remain unexplained within the terms of the discipline that produced the documentation. Number 6. The Bradshaw Figures, Victoria River District. The figures known as Gwion in their country of origin in the Kimberley extend into associated painting traditions found in the Victoria River District of the Northern Territory. They are among the most contested images in Australian rock art research. The Gwion figures show human forms in dynamic postures wearing what appear to be elaborate headdresses, sashes, and decorated garments. The rendering technique, involving multiple pigment layers and precise outlining, is more formally complex than most of the surrounding regional art. The figures appear to dance, to hunt, and to engage in ceremonial activity depicted with a specificity of detail that implies the artist was documenting something observed rather than imagined. A genetic and pollen study published in 2020 by researchers, including those from the University of Western Australia, used DNA extracted from a wasp nest built over one panel to establish a minimum age of approximately 17,000 years for the figures beneath it. This result pushed the Gwion tradition into the period of the last glacial maximum, when sea levels were lower, the coastline was different, and the North Australian landscape looked substantially unlike its current form. What cannot be explained is the apparent sophistication of the garments depicted. 17,000 years ago, the global consensus is that elaborate woven textile traditions did not exist anywhere. The figures suggest they did, at least in this part of the world, or that the images represent something else entirely that researchers have been consistently misidentifying as garments. Number 7. The Larapinta Trail stone arrangements, West MacDonnell Ranges. The West MacDonnell Ranges run east to west for several hundred kilometers west of Alice Springs, forming one of the most ancient exposed mountain systems remaining on the surface of the Earth. The quartzite ridges are estimated to be around 800 million years old. Within the ranges and along the corridors connecting water sources, waterholes, and ceremonial sites, researchers and bushwalkers with geological awareness have documented stone arrangements that do not correspond to any natural deposition process. Flat stones placed upright at regular intervals, cairn structures at specific topographic points, cleared circular spaces on elevated ground where the removal of surface rock has been deliberate and systematic. The Arrernte people, whose country the ranges represent, maintain detailed oral knowledge of these features and their significance within the Tjukurpa, the law and narrative system that organizes Arrernte, understanding of the landscape and its history. Many of the stone arrangements mark the roots of specific ancestral beings whose journeys created the geographic features of the ranges. What Western archaeology struggles to do with these arrangements is date them. Stone moved by human hands carries no organic material for radiocarbon analysis. Optically stimulated luminescence dating, which can establish when sediment was last exposed to light, has been applied to associated deposits at some sites and return dates in the tens of thousands of years. The arrangement of the stones themselves remains undated, and the question of their age and original purpose within any framework other than the one provided by Arrernte tradition remains formally open. Number 8. The Ewaninga rock carvings, Alice Springs region, 42 kilometers south of Alice Springs. The low sandstone outcrops at Ewaninga carry an engraving tradition that sits in its own distinct category within Central Australian rock art. The engravings at Ewaninga are almost exclusively geometric. Circles within circles, meandering lines that follow the contour of the rock surface, complex spiral sequences, and regular arrangements of pits that researchers have compared to marking systems found on other continents. What makes the Ewaninga engravings specifically interesting to researchers of archaeoastronomy is the orientation of specific engraved panels relative to solar and lunar events. Field measurements conducted by researchers from the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies have documented alignments between engraved sightlines and the rising and setting positions of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes. This alone would not be remarkable. Awareness of solar cycles is a basic functional necessity for any culture dependent on seasonal resources. What is harder to explain is the apparent encoding of longer astronomical cycles in some panel sequences. Spiral arrangements whose internal ratios correspond to the Metonic cycle, the 19-year period after which lunar and solar calendars realign, have been documented at Ewaninga and at comparable sites across Central Australia. The Metonic cycle was first formally described by the Greek astronomer Meton of Athens in 432 BCE. The engravings at Ewaninga that appear to encode it were made by people who were here tens of thousands of years before Athens existed. Number 9. The termite mound geometric landscape, Daly River region. The Daly River region, southwest of Darwin, is one of the top end's most biologically productive landscapes. A mosaic of monsoon forest, savanna, and river floodplain that sustains extraordinary diversity of plant and animal life. It is also home to one of the strangest large-scale landscape features documented anywhere in Australia. Magnetic termite mounds in the Daly River region orient themselves consistently along a north-south axis. This is a known biological phenomenon. The flattened mound shape minimizes morning and afternoon sun exposure, while maximizing the warming effect of the midday sun in a thermal regulation strategy of considerable elegance. That part is understood. What is not understood is a series of patterns in mound distribution across specific areas of the Daly River savanna that researchers from Charles Darwin University began documenting formally in 2018. In certain zones, the spacing between mounds follows a regularity that exceeds what would be expected from purely competitive territorial behavior among termite colonies. The distances are consistent. The orientations are consistent. The overall distribution across these zones, when mapped from above, produces geometric patterns whose regularity has not been satisfactorily explained by termite biology alone. The working hypothesis among the CDU researchers is that the patterns reflect landscape modification by human populations over very long timescales, with specific land management practices influencing termite colony establishment in ways that have persisted for thousands of years through the biology of successive mound generations. If that hypothesis is correct, the landscape of the Daly River savanna is in part an engineered structure created and maintained by indigenous land managers across a time frame and at a scale that has no comparison anywhere in the world. Number 10. The Uluru water engineering, Anangu country. Uluru is the most recognisable landform in Australia and one of the most recognisable landforms on the planet. Its cultural significance to the Anangu traditional owners is total and fundamental, and the physical rock itself has been the subject of extensive geological and hydrological study. What the hydrological studies have documented, and what receives considerably less attention than Uluru's visual monumentality, is a network of water catchment and channeling features around the base of the rock whose efficiency as a water harvesting system is remarkable. The natural geology of Uluru creates gutters, channels, and collection points that direct rainfall from the massive rock face into specific locations around the base. At several of these locations, the channels and pools show evidence of modification. Small stone placements and cleared surfaces that direct water flow with greater efficiency than the unmodified geology would achieve alone. The modifications are subtle. They are not the kind of dramatic engineering that attracts immediate attention, but hydrologists examining the water management performance of the Uluru base system have noted that the efficiency of water collection and storage at specific points around the rock is significantly higher than natural geology alone would produce. Anangu oral tradition describes the management of water at Uluru as an ancient responsibility. The physical evidence suggests the management has included modification of the natural water system over a very long period. The full extent and age of those modifications has not been formally studied, and the question of what systematic water engineering was being conducted here and across what timescale remains genuinely unanswered. What makes the Uluru water system particularly significant is that it demonstrates applied engineering at a very practical scale. This is not ceremonial mark-making or astronomical record-keeping. This is infrastructure designed to keep people alive in one of the driest inhabited landscapes on Earth, operating at an efficiency that modern hydrological analysis finds difficult to attribute to unguided natural processes. Number 11. The Devil's Marbles Alignment, Tennant Creek. 100 kilometers south of Tennant Creek on the Stuart Highway, the Kalu Kalu Conservation Reserve protects a remarkable landscape of enormous granite boulders balanced on the flat red plain in arrangements that have been the subject of both geological and cultural study for decades. The geological explanation for the Kalu Kalu is satisfying in its broad outline. Magma intruded into the surrounding rock approximately 1,700 million years ago. As the surrounding softer rock eroded over subsequent geological time, the harder granite was exposed as rounded boulders, their spherical shape the result of exfoliation weathering along natural joint planes in the rock. What the geological explanation does not account for is the overall distribution of the boulder formations across the flat plain, and specifically the spatial relationship between the largest boulder groupings and the astronomical horizon. Researchers conducting archaeoastronomical surveys of the Kalu Kalu from 2015 onward have documented that the primary axes of the major boulder groupings, when mapped and their orientation measured, align with astronomical sightlines of significance. The rising point of particular stars, important in Warramungu ceremonial tradition, the solstice sunrise and sunset positions, lines connecting major groupings that track the movement of celestial objects across the sky. The Warramungu people, whose country this is,
describe Kalu Kalu as the eggs of the rainbow serpent Uluru, and as the resting place of the dreaming ancestor, whose journey created this part of the landscape. Within Warramungu knowledge, the astronomical alignments are not coincidences. They are the expected result of creation events whose nature is not random. Whether the alignments are the result of natural geological processes that happen to correspond to astronomically significant directions, or whether human activity has modified the landscape over a very long period to emphasize and preserve those alignments, or whether the Warramungu explanation contains within it a different framework for understanding the relationship between geological and astronomical events, is a question that current research has not closed. 11 sites, 11 sets of physical evidence, 11 collections of questions that Western scientific frameworks have not yet answered to their own satisfaction. The Northern Territory contains more ancient and undisturbed landscape than almost anywhere else accessible in the developed world. The people who have lived within that landscape for the longest continuously documented period of human habitation anywhere on Earth maintain knowledge systems that encode observations made across timescales that make the entire history of Western science look like a brief interruption. The honest position at the end of this examination is not that these sites prove any particular theory. The honest position is that the evidence at each of these 11 locations is real. The dates are as reliable as current science can make them, and the explanations remain incomplete. That gap between what the physical evidence shows and what existing frameworks can explain is not an embarrassment to science or a defeat for reason. It is the place where genuine inquiry happens. The sites on this list have not been fully explained because they have not been fully studied. The research funding directed at ancient Australian sites represents a fraction of what comparable locations in Europe, the Middle East, and Central America receive. That is a choice that has been made, and it is a choice that can be unmade. If this raised questions you want to keep exploring, subscribe to this channel. We are here every week with content that takes the physical evidence seriously, without filling the gaps with comfortable certainties. Click the video on screen now to keep going. We will see you in the next one.